attendees, but we can do that probably once the meeting started if you want.
Okay.
You are unmuted.
If you want to tap that one, yeah, that'll just.
Oh, sorry.
I just did
Okay.
So I am muted or?
Oh,
You're now not
muted.
muted.
You're live.
If you're-
The one in my calendar.
That counts.
I'll just send it to me. Okay, I'm sending you right now. Is it the reminder email? Then if so, then that should be. But I just.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Are we ready, Paula?
Yes, we recorded.
Okay.
Well, don't worry, we got that all.
Sorry. I didn't hear you either. So. All right, we will start the work session for the January 18th Cottonwood Heights Planning Commission meeting. We will be reviewing the agenda items, which there's only one today for CTA 22004. The possible hearing, public hearing and possible action from AJ Rock LLC for a proposed amendment to the PDD2 ordinance. Are there any other items that we want to discuss during the work session other than the exciting introductions?
Just those.
Okay.
Yeah, so we have two. We've got a new commissioner, Mike Smith. We've got our new staff member, Ian Harris, who's our associate planner and sustainability analyst. So they're joining us both tonight. I don't know if Mike, you want to take a couple minutes and introduce yourself, and then Ian do the same.
Sure, thanks. Mike Smith, I've lived in the area since 1992. Moved from the Sugar House area, long-term Utah native. In the University of Utah. Worked on the faculty up there for a few years and have done a variety of other things. I'm a physician, retired mostly. Although I keep my options open to dive back into that a little bit, but never like it used to be. I'm interested in learning how this all works and what I can do to keep Cottonwood Heights being a wonderful place to live.
Great.
Any questions?
What's your like area of specialty? as a physician?
Psychiatry.
Oh, cool, very cool. Well, I will be keeping my mouth shut.
People say that, but then they always get me off in the corner.
Yeah.
I've got to talk to that.
Well, we're glad to have you. Welcome. In which, remind us, which district?
Mike is Council District 1.
One, okay.
Yeah.
Awesome.
And then Ian.
Yeah, my full name is Ian Harris. They hired me back in October. I just haven't had anything to bring to you guys, so I haven't been here until now. I just thought come and say hello and you get to meet me. So I won't be presenting anything tonight, but I look forward to coming back in the future with an item for you.
As a fun fact, Ian and I went to school together.
Yep.
At the U, so it's been fun to reunite.
Yes.
Together.
It's really fun to work together on sustainability. So Sam's carrying over a lot of her projects that she's been working on for a while, but we're working together on a few things. So it's been really fun.
Yeah, Ian's great.
It's been fun to have a full staff.
It's been
You bet.
very fun to have school staff.
Yeah.
Nice to meet you, and thanks for joining the mission, Mike.
My pleasure. Thank you.
All right, should we transition to project TA 2200?
Sure, yeah, thank you. I'll
You
just
have- are
open
you-
up the presentation.
You all good? on
I'm
the-
on, I made it. Barely. Okay. There's just one item tonight. Matt, can you put the screen down if you mind?
Oh, yeah.
No worries. It's a text amendment, but it's a little complicated because the PDD processes, the commissioners that have been here during that, as you know, it's a little different than typical zoning. So I'm going to take a few minutes to provide some context before I get into what the actual text amendment is, because it's just a little more confusing than normal. But this is an application for a text amendment. So this is a legislative item. So it's amendment to adopted city ordinance, but the ordinance is specific to the 20-acre development site at the northern end of the gravel pit. So I'll get into exactly what that means here as I go through this presentation. The applicant is AJ Rock LLC. That is the same applicant and developer that came back a year or two ago and went through the whole development entitlement process for that site and got that approved. So they are back with an updated application tonight. Here's the background. The city has an ordinance called Planned Development District Ordinance. I think some commissioners are familiar with it. Some in their role as a council member are familiar with it. Commissioner Shelton. It is an ordinance that allows, this is going to get a few layers deep. It's an ordinance that allows for the creation of an ordinance to govern specific sites in the city. It's not eligible to be used everywhere in the city. So the Planned Development District Ordinance for the city has a map on it of areas that are eligible to use this tool. The gravel pit being one of them, and then the major redevelopment areas along Fort Union kind of being the other ones, the major intersection nodes, 13th East and Highland and 2300 East. So an applicant or a property owner or developer can come in and use that Planned Development District tool to create a specific development plan and ordinance that applies only to one property. And it applies nowhere else in the city. So it's unique to that one property. So in this case, AJ Rock or Rockworth Development came in and they have purchased the northern 20 acres of the large gravel pit property. So in the total scope of the gravel pit is pretty small. It's that far northern side of it. But that's what they own, and they came in and applied for a PDD for that property. Some of the trade-offs of using this PDD process is developers are allowed a lot more flexibility in terms of densities and uses and building heights and massing and things like that. The trade-off is that they create an ordinance and a new zone and a development plan all in one go. So it's very labor intensive up front. It's very front loaded in terms of process. Typically, a council will approve a rezone without seeing the specific development plan. And then the development plan comes in later following, whatever zone is approved. This one kind of combines those things all into one. So it's a very extensive, detailed, time-consuming, as you'll remember, process to approve planned development districts in the city. We have two that exist so far that have gone through this process. One is known as the Walsh property, which is back kind of behind 1300 East in the northwest corner of the city. If you take the freeway interchange on-ramp over at Union Park, you'll see it there. It's mostly an apartment project being built right now. That was the first one. And then the second one was this one tonight. And we call this the PDD2 ordinance. So when I refer to the ordinance or PDD or anything like that tonight, I'm only talking about the northern gravel pit development plan zone, what came out of that whole process that Rockworth Development went through a couple of years ago.
So question.
Yeah.
So the Walsh property was
Yeah.
PDD 1.
Yes.
And in theory, there'll be a PDD 3 when.
As further applications are made, yeah.
Okay.
Yep, so new ordinances are technically created every time a PDD project is approved.
Got it.
And that's codified, that becomes ordinance and city code, only specific to that one area though. So the amendment proposed tonight is only the PDD2 ordinance. It's not the city plan development district tool. It's not the Walsh property. It's not anything else. It's just this one.
And that's why it comes as a zoning text amendment, is because the PDD is its own ordinance.
Just a refresher of what was approved for Rockworth Development. It's a mixed use development site, and this is oriented a little differently. North is pointing left. So this is the signal there, 6200 south or something like that. I think it is.
The old Wasatch Boulevard.
Yeah, old Wasatch Boulevard there. So Holiday City is everything left of what you see on the picture here. But just to kind of get your bearings, Wasatch Boulevard, the state road, is along the bottom here. So this is what was approved back by the Planning Commission and City Council, I think in 2020 or 2021. It's a mixed-use development consisting of a number of different phases of development types. This big square here is an apartment building. That's what we'll be talking about mainly tonight. A 325 unit apartment building, 15% of those units are deed restricted affordable units. That is another requirement of the PDD tool, is that if you have housing, a percentage of it has to be affordable.
What does affordable mean?
In this case, it means we take area median income, which is a certain amount for this geographic area of the city. And affordable is basically defined as 30% of your total household costs going towards housing. If you're over 30%, you're cost constrained. So an affordable housing tool in this area would be affordable to a family or an individual making 80% of the median income instead of 100% of it. So it's affordable to households making less. And the definition of affordable just means 30% or less of your total income is going towards housing.
It's a good question, because it is gonna be different in every case. So,
It's
yeah.
different in Cottonwood Heights, yeah, than it is in Mill Creek, than it is in Sandy and Draper. Everywhere's a little bit different. So the apartment building is kind of phase one. That's the big residential piece. There's a condominium building. The commission actually recommended approval of the condominium building as proposed. It was a 10-story building with about 90 or 99 units. The city council was concerned about that. So what the developer did at the time was say, okay, we'll come back in later and just entitle the use right now. And we'll come back in later and talk unit count and density and massing. So the condominium use and location is approved. The number of units and the building height and all of that will have to come back through a full PDD amendment at some point in the future. That will also come through the planning commission on its way to city council.
Is there any detail you can give us where the city council ended up in terms of a recommended height? Was there?
They didn't even get into that.
Okay.
Rockworth just said, we'll do it later.
Okay,
We want to get everything else moving now because this is our last phase and we'll come in at a future time. And then the rest of it here, it's kind of hard to see. These two middle pads are some retail pads. And then the buildings out along kind of Wasatch Boulevard are also retail or commercial mixed use buildings with a lot of plaza and courtyard space, and then a hotel building there as well. So you can see the details here. In addition to all of that, the development proposed a lot of public plaza and courtyard and trail space up the hillside. So this is what was approved. This is what's entitled. The PDD2 ordinance allows this today. Now they got their zoning entitlement. Now they have to go through site design and engineering and all of the very technical construction level details they need to prepare prior to construction. But that's the phase they're in right now. A big part of that initial application phase was scoping the site for sensitive lands. There are a lot of different hazards, natural hazards present on this site, including slope stability. We've got a mined out kind of graded away hillside that needs to be reclaimed. So that's a big issue. So that's hillside reclamation and slope stability. We've got fault lines. You can see here, that's why I put this picture in. All of the red is fault line or the setback required from fault lines. It's a little easier to see on the TV screen than it is on the projector. But the red lines are fault zones that you cannot build within. The green there would be steep slopes that you also cannot build within. And then you can see a blue line on this map as well, and that is the Metropolitan Water aqueduct easement. That there's a big water pipeline and an easement that runs right through the site. So there's a lot of constraints and a lot of things they had to study and assess as they were preparing this development plan. So the city required them to do pretty extensive fault trenching back at the time. And they did a number of those and prepared studies and reviews, and the city went back and forth on those for a long time with them. Where it ended up is a site-wide scoping plan was approved. And then there were conditions put actually in the ordinance that as buildings come forward, each phase again has to trench where their footprint is going to go to double check and make sure there is no fault activity where they're saying their buildings are going to go. So that was a requirement that was placed back in the ordinance when the PDD2 was approved. So they did that. They have been doing that, and they've actually gone out and cleared. They didn't just trench the apartment building, they trenched most of these buildings now. And actually didn't find anything too surprising other than what's highlighted here. And you can see this kind of diagonal fault line or this offshoot of a fault line was anticipated on the site, and where they found it was just at a slightly different angle than originally anticipated. What that did is that cuts through the corner of the apartment building that they had originally gotten approved, and it shrinks the building footprint, changes it just a little bit. So here's the impact of what that means for this apartment building. It modifies the footprint. Obviously, you can see the differences there from a rectangle to just a rectangle with the corner cut off. It modifies the massing as well, and I've got some renderings that will show that. And then it reduces the units in that building from 325 to 300. Additionally, because of the massing changes, the pool is no longer proposed to be on top of the parking deck. It's now on the ground. So I'll show that as well. These are some before and afters. I want to clarify, these are only massing diagrams. These are not architectural details. The ordinance also requires them to go through extensive architectural review as they come in with actual building designs. So these are not finalized in terms of materials or architectural detail in any way. It's just massing. So you can see the different vantage points and how that has changed or not changed a whole lot as a result of the modified building footprint. So the southwest corner would be kind of looking from Wasatch Boulevard north into the site. You can see it looks very similar to how it looked before. The original is on the top, the updated is on the bottom here. The southeast corner is actually, if you go in all the way in the back of that apartment building, at the very back of the site, again, it doesn't look a whole lot different, and that's not a super common view, especially from public rights of way either. The northwest corner is perhaps where it changes most significantly or in the most noticeable way. This building, if you looked at it from above before, it was kind of the shape of an S. It had kind of two open plazas or horseshoe shapes, but they alternated. So one was open to the front, one was open to the back. The second opening is essentially gone now. So they have the one opening and then just a building wing now. So you can see there the longer span of units there that was proposed before on the northwest corner is now gone because the fault line runs kind of right there where the cursor is. Cuts that side of the building a little shorter than it was before. And if you go on the back side of the development where you access it, they've changed that quite a bit as well, because these units now do not curve all the way around the side. They cut off. So they've got an entrance there. That fault line would run kind of right through this area here. Previously, the pool amenity was proposed to be right on top of this deck inside this back courtyard. Now that's just proposed to be at ground level, actually within that fault setback area, which a pool is allowed to be, just a habitable unit is not. So this is the impact of the fault lines. This is not necessarily what the commission is considering tonight, but this is the impact of what their text amendment would allow them to achieve. So there is a provision in the PDD2 code that was approved. Matt, are you able to minimize the little windows on the side? Okay. Yeah, thank you. So the red is what's new, is what's proposed. And I'll just read through this. There is a line in the code that says material changes to this ordinance or the development plan arising from a submittal, the discovery of unanticipated geologic hazards, or for any other reason shall require an amendment to this ordinance following review, recommendation, and or approval by basically all the approval bodies of the city. So this is saying if there are material changes as a result of ongoing sensitive lands hazard studies or scoping studies or anything like that, it has to go through the full PDD process, which is DRC review, neighborhood meetings, architecture review, planning commission hearings, city council consideration. The applicant has made a proposal to better define what the term material changes means here. And this is what they've come up with. And they've stated, for the purposes of this section, a change resulting in a decrease of less than 10% of unit count, density, building height, or massing or footprint is not considered a material change. In essence, that would allow them to make minor modifications
that are a decrease,
less intense than they were approved, but not so much less that it's a substantial change. Those would be allowed to be made administratively during kind of the site engineering and design process.
When I first read it, I didn't read it carefully enough. I was thinking it was saying like a change 10%, either getting bigger by 10% or less. So I do think it's notable that this is only if the project is decreasing by 10%, not if they were wanting to add on.
Anything outside of this, if it's a substantial decrease, say there was a fault line and the whole building had to go, or they had to cut the building footprint in half and double the height of it to fit the same units there and avoid the fault line. This doesn't apply. They would still have to go through that full PDD amendment there. Or if it was getting bigger at all, they can't come in now and propose more units or more massing or more height that without going through the full amendment process.
So just to make sure I understand,
Yeah.
if this is approved, this language, I think it's about 7% decrease in
This
the
is like
number of apartments.
7 or 7.5.
Yeah.
Yeah, I calculated it.
So they could just do that.
It has to be reviewed.
Still have to
fully
be
and everything, but
reviewed,
yeah,
right,
that would be
okay.
allowed without the full legislative
Whole thing,
process. to
okay,
do it. Yeah.
okay, all right, that makes sense. But then the other question I had, if,
Mhm.
can I jump into that, or do you want to wait until you're?
Go ahead.
Oh,
No, go
okay.
ahead.
If the, I know in your language or your review of that you say to approve it, but one thing that talked about was that the courtyard and trails were not impacted. And I'm wondering how we ensure that doesn't happen
Yeah,
with the language.
sure. So they have detailed site plans as part of their development plan. So as staff, when a request comes in, we're saying, okay, what you propose has to match this. And it's
Okay.
got square footages and, you know, lines
The
for
trails
trails and
and
areas and, you know, all of those calculations have been done already. So if anything is different than what we see, we would say this does not comply with your development plan, which is actually city code on this property. So we're not going to accept this.
Okay.
Unless, if this were approved, unless it's a building modification that reduces it by less than 10%. And if they can justify that, if this were approved, then that would be okay. Anything outside of that, it has to meet that development plan. Otherwise, it has to come through this full amendment process.
So if the building, okay, so if the building footprint was less than 10%, it's not going to impact, I'm just trying to think like
Yeah.
the keeping courtyards, keeping open spaces.
Right.
I think that
All of the, we
That
did
would
require calculations for areas and locations of all of those things early on. So we have the in very specific detail.
Right.
So,
any changes that, okay.
and I don't think staff would support if this were more open-ended. You know, staff wouldn't support those things
Right.
kind of being jeopardized there because that was important.
You have a question?
This may be in that, but I think there's some ambiguity in the way it's drafted as to what the 10% applies to.
Okay.
That it applies to each of those items rather than just the first of those in the comma separated list
Oh, okay.
Oh, 10, so you could say 10% of
of the
the
unit count.
following,
Yeah,
you know, colon, all those things. Yeah,
Sure, so it's not just of the unit count.
it's not 10% of unit count or any change in density height.
Yeah.
things
We
like
always
that. Okay.
appreciate it being really clear, so I think that's actually a really good comment. So that it isn't another issue on
Yeah.
it.
Although along those lines, I think it's hard to, it's easy to measure 10% of unit count and density, and it's easier to measure 10% of building height, which 10% of you wouldn't really see that because it wouldn't be a whole story
that would
unless it
be-
was 10 stories tall,
Right.
Yeah.
which might come into play in the condo.
Right.
But measuring 10% of a building footprint or massing, I think is kind of difficult. And if I'm looking at the S correctly,
Mhm.
and looking at this rendering correctly, it would be tough to tell whether or not
Sure.
that they've really reduced 10%. It feels
So-
like maybe that's even more than 10%.
Well, what I would say is this is what they've proposed.
Okay,
And then, I mean, I would hope that they've done their homework. You know, from a unit count standpoint, they're fine.
right.
Would you be looking at like from square footage in the footprint, say?
You'd have to look at that square footage of the footprint, which
Right.
maybe on the parking.
and
it's
is
just-
massing a volume question? Well, how do you,
What
Yeah.
does the
determine-
architect say? What does Jesse say?
Well, I think that'd be a hard calculation.
I think it's worth
to
asking.
do.
Yeah. that's a good
I'm
point.
wondering if it matters, like, I wonder if it'd be better just to leave it at unit count. And,
You know, it could be something like unit count, density, building height, and the resulting impact that those reductions have on massing
On
or
the
building
site.
footprint.
or the.
Because if you can't modify those things by more than 10%, the footprint size isn't really gonna change a whole lot. That's probably,
the footprint you probably can calculate though.
Yeah, but I'm not convinced that they have, and that it fits within the 10%.
That's a good question.
I think that would be a good question to ask
I
them.
think Jessica or Commissioner Chapel has her hand up on Zoom, so want to make sure we give her time too.
Yeah,
All right, can you guys hear me?
yes.
Okay, yeah, I had a similar question about the footprint. And I do think, you know, if it should be what, you know, the language changes a little bit. I think maybe square footage would matter, right? Because if they grew all of the units by a certain amount, that could be a significant change, or shrunk by, that could be a significant change to the project as well. But I think the one kind of new item that I think should be addressed is, from a structural building code standpoint, 10% has a storied history of, you could change a building by 10% without doing a full code review, but then people would chip away like 10% this remodel and then 10% next remodel. And so that whole idea of like a cumulative change, I'm wondering if there's a limit that could be placed. So for instance, in this particular case, the most plausible instance could be, the aqueduct, that segment of the Salt Lake Aqueduct is very vulnerable for seismic reasons because it crosses the fault so many times. There are so many different fault scarps. So I know the water district has plans to harden or strengthen segments of the aqueduct. Should their new plan include a slightly different route and not impinged upon this building footprint, and it's 10% more, like that, is there some way we could put some guardrails on the language so that any additive instances are also within some certain limit?
Yeah, I'll do my best to answer the question. The 10% would be based on the development plan that's approved today. So it's all based on that initial proposal today. And if that scenario happened where they had to keep modifying, there would be a point where we'd say, okay, no, this is beyond what a material, or this is beyond a change that we don't consider material. This would have to go back through the full PDD amendment process. So the 0 point is the development plan as it is today.
Okay, so we could add a small phrase in there saying cumulative changes or something, total of changes.
Sure.
10% from the original. Okay, great.
Yeah, that's great. I will also state they have been working with the water district. I think they do have approval from the water district for this development plan.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah.
Excellent.
I think
That was a
that's
big question for me.
Really good point, Commissioner Chapel, that we want it to be clear that you can't end up changing it 60% just through 6 instances of a 10% attrition. So I think that would be a reasonable thing for the commission to consider as you think about what you might forward to the city council for a recommendation.
And maybe it's just adding that word original. But I would add to that too. I can see an interpretation of this 10% for the entire project too. And I would like to add something specifying that it's to a particular structure, because I think with that same, not just over time, like Commissioner Chapel mentioned, but maybe it's like, well, we'll modify it over here and we'll modify it over here within the current project. And I think their intent is, and I think it would allow them to do what they're doing, because we're really this is being put together relative to one of the structures.
Yeah.
And that's why I would like it, per building or per structure, however we want to.
I think that's a good point, because what we don't also want to see is, hey, I don't know, if it's cumulative and you can have 10% per structure and they say, well, we're going to change one building by 40% and you won't change the other ones.
Exactly. That's my point. And I would just institutional memory, this lot is so crazy with the fault lines. And I mean, they came back to us with so many different versions of what they could even physically do, given the faults and slopes and the easement. And there was a lot of homework and back and forth between us and then the city council. So, I mean, we came to this not easily and
casually.
Or casually by a long shot. I don't know if you have anything to add to that, but.
Well, a different thought maybe, but I don't think the risk here is too great that someone's going to keep whittling their building down and take advantage of us.
And that's the point that
They're not going to keep carving it down, making
Sam
it
made
smaller.
that great point that, I mean, it's decreased. I mean,
they
where
can't do
can
anything.
we get hurt by decreasing unless it's whack-a-mole and you decrease it here and it pops up somewhere
Right.
else. And if it's over the whole development, it's like, oh yeah, we'll just take that down a few stories and we'll max out somewhere. I mean, like, for example, let's say that they decrease this and now they want to add a couple of stories, making the argument that financially we need to go 12, 13 stories high on the condos. That would be that would be hard for me to swallow, given
Yeah,
how we feel about view sheds.
and then any increase, like you're mentioning, would then come back if a decrease triggered an increase, the increase would have to come back through the full PDD process.
Our main concern on capping the decrease to a small 10% is the affordable housing piece.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because we don't want to whittle away all of our affordable housing.
Yeah, where the affordable housing is a percentage of the total unit. I think in most circumstances, people would be like, oh, less units, that's great, but we still want to be getting our affordable housing provided, so. I think that does merit it being like a small percentage where you're not seeing a huge.
I think as long as you limit it to a single building and you don't trade buildings, then you.
Is that implicit, or do we need to make
We can
that?
clarify it, that's fine.
I don't think it
Yeah.
hurts to clarify it.
Okay,
So what we could do is clarify, it's 10% per building. It's all based on the development plan as the starting point for where that decrease is established from. And then I don't know if maybe this is just in the drafting of the final language, that it's clear that the 10% is not just to unit count, it's to whatever measurable things that you want to include. And if there's concerns with massing as kind of a nebulous concept, how do you measure that? You know, we can refine that further as well.
I think it's more problematic for them than it is
Yeah.
That's a good point.
us.
But I think Commissioner Shelton was right. I don't think they're going to be looking to make as many decreases here as they can. That's usually not how this works, but
Yeah, it's a good reminder that this text amendment is just for this project. Most of the times when we're looking at a text amendment, it's for an overarching ordinance where that could be implemented at any property. And that's where we maybe see more risk. But I think you've sussed out some good points of this being like a pretty tightly constrained project. So they probably, maybe that means they wouldn't be looking to change it a lot. That said, I think sometimes the ordinances that do exist can be used as templates for other PDDs down the road. So it is good to have these conversations now, kind of know how we might handle it on others if they come.
so here are just the findings. Material change is not defined. And this is a good point, and the applicant brought this up, and it's fair. It's not defined in the PDD2 ordinance, the city code, or the planner's dictionary. And that only matters because we have a line in our code that says, if something's not otherwise defined, check the planner's dictionary. It's not in there either. So it's not, this is not at odds with any established definition in our city code already. Limiting material change to a maximum reduction of 10% limits the scope and impact of allowed changes that can be made administratively, which is also important. If they want to change other things, fine, there's a process to do that, and they can go through that, like they will have to for the condominium building. So that's that first bullet point there. It only applies to kind of those building level, those building design characteristics. It does not apply to the public spaces. And it allows the minor and reasonable flexibility that inevitably arises from entitlement phase and concept site plan to final building plans. As a reminder, this is a legislative application, so the commission's vote when you're ready to make it is a recommendation to the city council. You can add notes, specific recommendations that your formal recommendation is contingent on. Things like that, but you are making a recommendation, and then the council will take final action. And I've got model motions. So that's all I've got. Any questions on this that we haven't talked about already?
are you taking notes for a possible model
Yeah.
motion with those?
Yeah,
edits?
we've
Awesome.
noted them down.
Great.
We could provide them to you at the dais if you want to have them.
That would be great, just
handy.
to speed things up. I
Do you
mean,
have them on yours?
I was just writing them down per
Oh, there we
the
go.
specific building.
Yeah, so what I have, I can go through my notes and then we
Yeah.
can make sure. It's 10% to each of the characteristics described, and maybe we modify how massing is referred to there. Maybe it's the related change that reduction has to massing or something like that.
I'm trying to like run through the scenarios of if you reduce 10% of the units, how you could end up with a negative impact. I mean, in every case, you're either reducing mass or footprint.
Right.
And in either one of those cases, either you're lowering the height of the building or you're adding site land, developed landscape to the project.
Not necessarily, though. You could leave it the same building, the exact same size, just reduce the number of units.
And take, either then you're making the units bigger.
Yeah, you'd have
Or-
bigger units.
Or you're reducing the height of the building. But I think we've already approved that site plan as it stands,
Yeah.
so in all cases, I just don't know that massing height or footprint actually needs to be.
It looks like Commissioner Epler has his hand up for whenever you're ready to
Yeah, I
call. I don't know if you want to finish going through these notes.
don't have the
but-
answer yet.
Okay.
Yeah. Well, in that case, maybe I'd recommend, I think it's okay to keep building height in there, because that's a touch point on these projects. But it could be unit count, density, and building height. Understanding that inherently, if you're reducing all of those things, everything else is gonna reduce.
Yeah, you're reducing the footprint, you're reducing the mass, or you're potentially reducing those.
If we
two
think for a
things.
future project, I mean, that would be the only thing I could think of. PDD 4 or whatever, 3 or 4. Like, do we anticipate that if the layout were different, we didn't have these restrictions, it was just blank land? Would we want any of those?
I think the context would be different, because this was written specifically because of all the hazards that exist on this property.
Mhm.
So we might have this conversation when we, if the large gravel pit site comes through this process. But if it's a flat, unencumbered piece of land, you're probably just gonna say, here's your development plan, just meet it.
And
There's
couldn't
not
we-
these-
Couldn't we not, or PDD 3,
Uh-huh.
we wouldn't have to have this language.
Nope.
We can leave it as it is, G is now without this additional
Yeah.
language, and
You
then, so.
Yeah,
I think
so-
that's important to remember,
Okay.
because this is specific.
Yeah, it
to
could
PDD 2.
influence future iterations, but only if the commission felt that it should.
So I think the trick that gets you hung up here is if you eliminate building massing and footprint from that language, then I think you're either saying, and I'm not sure which of the two, you're either saying that any change to the footprint is not material, or every change to the footprint is material. I don't know which of those you're saying, but you're saying one of those things.
I see.
So you have to say, at least to
We're
get to the
allowing
purpose
some
here,
footprint modification.
yeah, some footprint
Oh, yeah.
modification is not a material change.
Well, yeah,
What that is exactly
Yeah.
is hard to quantify.
I think it could be the impact that the decrease of unit count, density, and building height just has, the direct impact of reducing those things has on massing and footprint. And then it's not a hard number, but it is acknowledging, hey, if I decrease, 10% of the units and I have to change the building a little bit, but it's all within that 10%, the footprint's gonna look a little different. It's not greater, because greater still has to come back through the process.
Yeah.
It is less, but it doesn't have that hard cap of 10%, which we don't know how to measure massing by a percentage necessarily.
I mean, you can, it's just. And maybe they've done their math and it checks out and they proposed this language, so we should
They
just go for it.
Well, that's what I was just thinking
Yeah.
is, and what's the danger in leaving it
Yeah.
there? I mean, there's to just ensure a cohesive kind of,
Um,
I think you should see that calculation now.
show us.
We like to just make you do it for once. It's fun.
Show us the massing cap.
The developer wants to restrict themselves. I don't like to stop them from restricting
do you guys
themselves.
want to take, should we have Commissioner Epler on mute?
Yeah.
Just want to make sure his questions. Commissioner Epler, can you hear us?
I can.
Okay, go ahead.
So if I heard correctly, I think Mike said one of the chief concerns the city has is just any of the triggers for the affordable housing. So wouldn't it just behoove us to just add some specific language of having, no material impact, or this trigger wouldn't have any impact to the affordable housing counts?
Well, it does, because the affordable housing counts are a percentage of the total units.
Right.
So inherently, if you decrease units, you are going to lose some affordable housing. In this case, if the condominium building were never built,
Right.
because those are residential units, and a percentage of those, whether in the condos or in the apartments, will have to be affordable. If it's 325 today, that gives you, I did the math earlier, that gives you a certain amount, like 40, 47 or 48
Right.
affordable units. If you decrease that by 10%, the max reduction allowed without a full amendment, it's like 292 total units, and you lose 4 affordable housing units.
But I mean, well, the main goal for the city is to keep the number of affordable housing units, correct?
Keep the ratio.
I think the ratio is what we're concerned about, and where you have, you know, the difference between 48 and 44.
Yeah.
Compared to any other project in the city, we're still getting way more affordable housing units here than we are anywhere else.
Also, Commissioner Evler could be like included in the clause that says a decrease of less than 10% of the unit count.
Yeah.
That could be extrapolated to include, you know, 10% of the affordable housing.
Yeah, I mean, as you guys were talking, like, and I don't know if this is necessarily relevant, but I remember reading an article in the Wall Street Journal like 6 months ago about an issue that popped up in Aspen recently, in which developers have started to game some of these standards by just going underground versus going up, and I'm curious if that would come into play here, because if the developer went down, let's say that there's, you know, X number of square feet on the first floor for general amenities. If they went down a floor and put those amenities underground instead of for the first floor, and then could add units there, or change square footages or whatever else, the massing doesn't change, the footprint doesn't change, but the overall building square footage inside would change.
The
The
unit
number
count
of
would go
units,
up.
yeah,
Yeah,
the unit count going up would have to.
It doesn't have to. I mean, what if they kept the unit count the same, but just jiggered around the square footages?
Well, then the
Density.
building height would drop, I would presume, right?
Not necessarily.
Square footage would
Well,
increase.
if the massing and the amenities and the building height and the unit count don't change, I don't know that we'd have a problem with that.
Okay. It was just something I had read, because
That's an
Amos,
interesting
go
point.
ahead.
Yeah. So
I mean,
staff
it
is
was just-
comfortable with
You should.
10% and its impact on a site this large with this many units, its impact on affordable housing units. So we're fine with it. We think it's reasonable, but that's up to.
yeah, I don't have a heartache over this at all, just in a general sense. It was just kind of things that I just kind of remember reading and things that.
Yeah.
It's a great discussion. So outside of the wording, the other notes I had, Commissioner Allen, were the 10% reduction is all based on the development plan, the PDD2 development plan, as the original starting point for any reductions.
And just for my sake,
Mhm.
a change here does not amend that plan.
Correct.
That
The development
plan,
plan is still the same.
okay,
What is built, the footprint of that building might look a little different than the development plan, but if it's within this 10%, it would be fine.
so I think if you go back to the language,
The language there.
material change to this ordinance or development plan. So this allows a 10% change to the development plan. I think.
Yeah, well, it would have
So
to
the
because
It does not
I
change,
understand.
though, the codified site plan.
Okay,
So this allows, as you design and build the buildings, it may look a little different, and if it's within 10%, that's okay. It doesn't change what's codified in PDD2, other than this red sentence here.
and the site plan is what's codified.
So this here is the development plan. That's in the ordinance right now, and this itself wouldn't change. The building permit would have this blue square on it on the right. That does look a little different, and we would have a note on there that says this is within 10%. So this complies with section G here. It's not a material change.
Is there a time limit on their entitlements?
Well, I don't know that that's accurate with the text.
To formally change this development plan would require a full.
I think that tell me though, if it's less than 10%, how would it require that? If that language holds that you propose.
That it doesn't change, this development plan stays the same. So we're talking about using the development plan as the baseline for reductions, right?
But that language says you can change the development plan.
By less than 10%.
It doesn't say the development plan is held.
If you added of a particular building or
Instead of the plan
of
at
an
large.
individual building to that language, then it wouldn't allow a 10% change in the development plan. Maybe.
Or you could add language that the 10% is measured from the originally codified development plan. It all goes back to.
Yeah, and no amendment that's contemplated by this amends the original codified development plan.
Are you saying, Commissioner Shelton, though, that, are you getting at like by virtue of a minor 10% increase of a building's density, that would change that development plan, or is that not your concern?
But my concern is that we're saying that the development plan is static.
Sure,
This contemplates that it's not static,
that it could have a 10%
that it can be modified by
increase.
10%.
Yeah, I see what you're saying.
Again, it's going down. It's
Yeah.
not that big a wordy.
Yeah, so I think we could have a line in here, and this can just be a broad recommendation when you make this vote, and we can workshop and finesse it before city council, but it's the reductions are based on the numbers and the locations in the originally codified development plan, the PDD2 ordinance. And if they want to change that, they can change all of that, but they have to do the full PDD process to amend it all.
Yeah.
And then that would give them a new development plan if they.
And then they could have
And then.
packet that by 10% if
Right.
they wanted to.
Correct.
I have a question. If they wanted to do that,
Mhm.
just for my, from a inexperienced point of view, how
Yes.
long does that take if they wanted to start?
Well, the
About
first time around.
4
it took
years.
2 years.
So there's a big disincentive.
Yeah.
Long time.
It's a major public process.
You
yeah.
definitely
Very,
want
very difficult.
to try to keep any changes at the administrative level so that you're not having to go all the way back
Do all
through.
this.
Yeah, probably for time as much as cost. I'm guessing like from a design perspective, having to do a bunch of full re-concept drawings is costly.
Okay. So changes would all be measured based on the originally codified development plan. The 10% reduction applies per building.
Commissioner Ebler had asked how long they had on their entitlement.
Oh, it's a zone. It's a rezone, so there's no time limit.
It's just the new zone.
They don't
of the
have
property.
Yeah,
Permit yet.
they don't have any permits. Once they apply for permits, they have certain timelines to keep permits active.
Or
But
even the subdivision level to subdivide the property into different paths for building. There's timeframes on when you have to record your plat by.
and I do want to say, I don't know, I know in the Walsh property ordinance, there is a clause in that code that says the city may revert this ordinance to the original zoning if no progress is made within a certain time frame.
Oh,
I don't know if that exists in this one or not.
That's what I was asking, because I know other jurisdictions, they developers have to kind of tickle these entitlements every few years to kind of keep them active.
Yeah, it
Yeah,
might be in there.
That's a good question.
Okay, and then I don't know where we landed on the 10% thing, but maybe we landed on, hey, we're trusting that they made a proposal that they think their buildings comply with, and maybe it's not a big deal to
Yeah,
worry too much about massing and things like that.
I'm gonna lead. Personally, I would go back on changing that.
Okay.
And just leave it the way it is. So I have, first one is measured from the originally codified development plan. Second one is the 10% reduction is limited to to a specific building. And then I think we wanted to add that the language of the following, a decrease of less than 10% of the following items, unit count.
Yeah,
There's a little colon in there.
right.
Grammar. Comes back to it.
And then was there,
when we say it applies to a single building, does that mean if they want to go on the next building, they don't have another 10%?
No, I think it applies per building. You can't say, if I took all the square footage of all the buildings on site, my 10% is 100,000 square feet, and I can use all that on one building.
And it also, you guys have addressed that it can't be, oh, well, now I'm doing another 10%
Yeah.
to the same building. Now I'm doing another, it's 10%.
that was the fourth. It's
10%.
a comprehensive
Yeah.
10%.
10% per building you're eligible for, I think is kind of what it's getting at, but
again from the.
From the
originally
original. It
codified.
might be covered in the bullet points we already have.
I actually think this is a more responsible way for us to set this up, because I think there's a high probability that they may run into other issues as we get to the other buildings.
Sure.
And for the south gravel pit, it's gonna be the same thing. And I think this threads the needle of flexibility for the developer without carte blanche to just start moving things around without running it through you guys and through our process.
Yeah.
The other thing about leaving footprint in there, now that I've gone 180, is that because of that, they may not want to reduce the number of units, but they might want to just.
Reconfigure
switch
it all
them.
together, yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
And if you can measure 10% of the switch, then you
Yeah.
know, but I don't know exactly how you'll say, well, that's 12%.
But that's a big deal. We had lengthy discussion when they, I mean, even before the full trenching, when they realized exactly where, once they'd surveyed and found where the water line was. It changed. The development looked really, really different when they weren't concerned about that. I mean, they really had to disarticulate it from that whole idea of that main plaza. That was not an architectural detail. That was a necessity.
how was this
As is this.
publicly noted?
This is a citywide text amendment technically, so there was no mailer sent out, but it goes on the city website, so anyone subscribed there would have gotten this. And then it's published on the state public meeting notice website and at City Hall and on the city.
bulletin boards, and then I think also e-notifications for anyone signed up.
Yeah.
When it's a zoning text amendment, because it's not like the conditional use permit is at a specific address, so you have to send mailers within 300 feet of an address. Although this zoning text amendment pertains to a property, we still follow the zoning text amendment noticing standards, which you wouldn't then see mailers going out, because most times it's not about an actual property, it's like citywide. So we just, follow those protocols.
There are not very many addresses within 300 feet of this location
No.
in the city anyway.
Even holiday.
We had did it that way.
Yeah.
And then the packet and agenda were also noticed, but we didn't receive any public comment on it, so
Okay.
we'll see if maybe there will be some people here tonight in person, but
So I would also ask, just remembering the history with this, that we make sure that we contact all the appropriate people in Holiday City. And let's do that early, not late. Just whether it's the mayor's level, because you remember, this borders right on Holiday, and this modification will be visible to the residents that are up in that
Sure.
area, that Hughes Canyon area.
yeah, we send it to their city recorder for her to pass along to her city leadership. So it goes to what we call affected entities every time, which includes our neighboring cities.
They really came back hard at us, so I mean, just even if it's a phone call to make sure that, hey, listen, they later on in the process, I think we've done that the first time appropriately, and then it came to the light of day, and they kind of painted it like we in the dark at night had done this huge big project, and we'd notice them appropriately, but I mean, even if it's mayor to mayor, that, hey, listen, there was a minor tweak here, we don't think anybody will have any heartburn, but please make sure everybody is aware, so.
Yeah, we'll be in there. Yep, 5 minutes. Yeah.
When the condo building gets designed, does that go back in front of the planning commission?
That'll do the whole, neighborhood meetings,
to-
DRC, architecture, planning commission, city council.
Okay. Right, any other questions on this item, or should we adjourn?
Motion to adjourn?
Second.
Okay, all in favor?
Hi.
Thanks.
I'm